We're now at the midpoint of the Trump administration, right? So let's do maybe a quick review, what you think. What kind of grade would you give him? And do you see any kind of norms being displayed? You know, we're at Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs. Are there values to this administration? I know that he talks about reciprocity a lot. That's one of his favorite words, apparently. Do you see that? And does Trump sort of do you see a strategy emerging in foreign policy?
I mean, reciprocity is hard because he obviously believes that rules do not apply to him, right? So he's one of the least reciprocal leaders I personally have ever encountered. I do believe that transactionalism, I do believe unilateralism. I think that, you know, I've said before that I feel like his foreign policy is very Chinese in many ways. It's not long-term and strategic, but it's certainly like he doesn't care about the human rights, he doesn't care about the sovereignty really matters to him, he doesn't want to be constrained by multilateralism, he's the big guy, so he wants to be one-on-one, deal-making. That's the way the Chinese heretofore have actually done a lot of their foreign policy. And what kind of a grade do I give them? The cheap thing to say is incomplete.
Midterm exams.
The cheap thing to say is incomplete, absent,
But you're not
for
cheap.
a lot of stuff. I can be cheap. So the mainstream media gives him an F minus, right? I mean, you know, Rachel Maddow every night going, oh my God, right? I mean, the hair is on fire.
Exhausting.
It's exhausting. And I think it is more interesting to recognize that there are two very different ways to grade Trump. The first way to grade Trump is to understand that his actual policy impacts are both pretty aligned with what Republicans in many cases historically would have argued for domestically. His judicial appointments, his Fed appointments, his regulatory rollback, his selective enforcement, his tax policy, all of this stuff, right? And on foreign policy, he's talked a huge game, and the needle just hasn't moved much. I mean, you know, he's left Paris, the climate accord, but actually you can't physically leave until 2021, so if he doesn't win a second term, nothing happens, and most of them, the key American constituents are still adhering to it anyway. He pulled out of TPP, but everyone else that was in TPP actually still did the deal, so a future American president go in. He pulled out of the Iranian deal, but the Iranians are still holding up their end of the bargain, as is everyone else, and they're trying to run out the clock on what they hope will be a one-term Trump deal. So, I mean, Pompeo will tell you privately that if he doesn't get a second term, his Iran policy fails. Right? What else? You can look at NAFTA, which he says is the worst deal ever, and he ends up doing a deal that's a slight improvement at the margins from what NAFTA used to be. He talks big on fire and fury with North Korea. Now we're going to have a second summit, and you know, incrementally, actually, North Korea is behaving a little better than they used to, but there's no real movement there. So you look at that, and you say, what the hell are these people talking about on the media? Like, this is just, there's not much there.
I agree.
But then you look at the erosion of U.S. leadership and in the global order and the lack of capacity to respond to Belt and Road, which was already happening under Bush, already happening under Obama a little more, but now is happening much more under Trump. Right, because leaders around the world do not trust the United States as much, and clearly Trump is partially responsible for that. So if you're going to grade him on leading by example, if you were going to grade him on some kind of defensive measure to try to prevent the G0 from becoming as nasty and dangerous as it can be, reducing and responding to the geopolitical recession, on that front, you give him an F. On that front, you give him an F. But on the, you know, on the actual policies being implemented and the talk big and all the, you know, I just don't think it's remarkable.
So tepid?
Tepid, and on a couple things. Again, if you ask me about where we are with South Korea on trade right now, marginal improvement. Where we are with North Korea, marginal improvement. Where we are with NAFTA, marginal improvement. Where we are with NATO, other countries starting to spend a little bit more, marginal improvement. So, you know, maybe even a bit more than tepid.
Right.
Even a bit more, though he's broken some other stuff. I mean, you know, after bad start on Yemen, for example, I mean, now that Mohammed bin Salman has been, you know, sort of really clipped back, we have a ceasefire in the port of Hodeidah, which the U.S. has actually been useful on. Now, Trump's public talk about MBS has been appalling and atrocious. But, you know, I mean, and he was the guy that moved the embassy to Jerusalem, and the Israelis really like that. Everyone said it's going to be a disaster. What was the impact of it? I mean, the Brazilians doing the same thing.
Crickets.
Zero. Crickets. So, I mean, it's hard for me to get that worked up on the policy side. But you take it one big step back and look at where the world is heading. And again, you and I have been talking about how we are heading into a very black geopolitical period. Trump is not helping that.
Yeah.
Trump is hurting that. That is true.